Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Colombian political parties. So today's episode was requested by Samuel Hitch on YouTube, and also I think someone else, sorry I can't really remember who. If you want me to talk about another country's political parties, you can either comment it down below, send me an email, or put a request in the request form in the description. I currently have requests to do New Zealand parties, Brazilian parties, Nigerian parties, Irish parties, Danish parties, Polish parties, Japanese parties, Greek parties, Chilean parties, German parties, and many more. Colombia is right now in a transitional state between the current government and the next. Last March, the legislature was elected, and on the 29th of May, the president of the country will be elected. While later in the episode I will talk about which parties grew and which parties shrunk, it's important to note that the elections this year have really been categorized by a strong desire for change for many in Colombia, with traditional political elites seen as leading the country to its current poor economic state, inability to deal with rising crime in the country, and rocked by protests back in 2019 to 2021 over economic and racial inequalities in the country. Another important topic for this election, and really every election in the country, is violence. Since 1946, Colombia has had varying levels of political violence in the country. Today, the three main actors of the conflict are the Colombian state, several leftist guerrillas fighting to establish a socialist republic in the country, and also maybe make some money selling drugs, holding people for ransom, and exploiting the people in the region they operate in, and various paramilitary groups who tend to be violently anti-communist, and are willing to engage in the drug trade and other illegal activities. In this conflict, essentially every side is willing to engage in widespread war crimes, particularly nowadays targeting poor rural communities. This is a pretty broad overview, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of the conflict, just so it doesn't take forever to get to the actual meat of the episode. But the main point is there's a lot of political violence in the country despite the peace deal signed in 2016 between the government and FARC, the largest guerrilla group in the country. The presidential election in Colombia is a two-round system. If no candidate gets over 50% of the vote in the first round, the top two candidates will move on to a second round, and whichever candidate gets the most votes will win. Based on opinion polls, it seems there will probably be a second round between Gustavo Petro, a current senator and former guerrilla fighter and mayor of Bogotá, who is polling around roughly 39% of the vote, and Federico Gutierrez, a former mayor of Medellin, who is polling around roughly 25% of the vote. The Colombian legislature is divided into two houses. The lower house is the Chamber of Representatives and has 188 representatives who are elected from several different ways. So the majority of them are elected from 32 departments plus the capital city of Bogotá via proportional representation. Each department has a different number of representatives, with 11 having as low as 2 representatives, while the capital has 18 representatives. Another 2 representatives are elected from the black community in the country, while another one is elected from the indigenous community, and another seat is elected from the Colombian diaspora. Due to the peace deal, 21 seats are set aside for certain people, with 5 seats being automatically given to FARC's new legal party, Comuns, or Commons, and 16 seats given to communities affected by the conflict. Finally, a single seat is reserved for the runner-up in the vice presidential elections, vice president candidate. The House of Representatives votes on laws and regulations, has the power to bring up impeachment, has the final say on the budget of the country, and elects the ombudsman. The Senate is the upper house, and has 108 senators. 100 senators are elected via simple proportional representation, with a 3% electoral threshold. Another 2 senators are elected from the indigenous community, 5 seats are again reserved for the commons, because of the peace deal, and a final seat is given to the runner-up in the presidential race. The Senate votes on rules and regulations, elects the Attorney General, and can declare war on another country. The Senate and the House seem roughly equally powerful, although being a senator might be more prestigious just because it's a smaller body. Also, Colombia is a member of the Andean community and sends 5 members to Andean Parliament. The Andean Parliament serves a similar function to EU Parliament, working to ensure development and free trade between its member states, although it seems to be less powerful and focused on than the EU Parliament. So we begin first with the coalition. Historic Pact is a coalition of left-wing forces. This includes socialist parties such as the Alternative Democratic Pole or Patriotic Union, indigenous rights groups such as the Indigenous Authorities of Colombia, or indigenous and social alternative movement, communist or far-left groups such as the Colombian Communist Party or Commons, and even more centrist parties like the Broad Democratic Alliance or We Are All Colombia. However, seemingly the largest faction in the coalition is the Humane Colombia Party, which is the party Petro is from. All of these parties ultimately seek a left-wing alternative to the status quo. Petro seems to want to appeal to the indigenous and black vote in the country, along with working class and other disadvantaged groups. The coalition got most support in March from indigenous voters, the diaspora, Bogotá, and broadly in the southwest, and overall increased its size. It has 35 representatives and 23 senators. The party is led by its presidential candidate Petro, but also its vice presidential candidate, Francia Marquez, a social activist in the country. Since the coalition is made up of several different members, it doesn't really have a clear ideological message, and on its website it just makes a vague statement on its message. However, it seems the parties are all united around opposing the status quo, are skeptical towards free market economics, oppose racism and discrimination in the country, and believe the government should continue to negotiate with leftist guerrillas and stick to the peace deal. Petro's campaign is based around ensuring greater representation of women in the country, introducing a Minister of Equality, wants more environmental protections, wants to do more to fight inequality in the country, and wants to decentralize the country economically. I would also imagine the coalition is in favor of cracking down more on the paramilitaries in the country, since the paramilitaries have been actively targeting several of the parties in the coalition, and Petro himself on May 5th being threatened by the La Cordillera organization. The historic front right now does look set to be the largest bloc in Congress, and Petro has a pretty good shot at winning the presidency. But it will be difficult for the coalition to get its policies passed. Most of the Colombian political elites, and even in Congress itself, are conservatives, opposed to many of the leftist proposals of the group, and will likely make it difficult for the group to operate without watering down its opinions. This watering down of opinions will also probably lead to some infighting, especially considering the large number of parties and individuals with different ideological backgrounds in the organization, including, of course, former guerrillas, which may make some people who have suffered from violence by leftist guerrillas hesitant to vote for them. On Petro's website, there is also a section about fake news that debunks false claims about him, and while it's good for Petro's campaign they are fighting false claims about him, it seems to be indicative that there is a lot of negative press about him going around on social media, which, regardless of if it's true or not, will probably hurt his campaign. Next we go to the Partido Liberal Colombiano, or Colombian Liberal Party. The Colombian Liberal Party is, unsurprisingly, liberal, but starting in the 2000s it began to move in a more left-wing direction, with its more right-wing members leaving the party. Today it is considered center-left-ish. The Liberals, along with the Conservatives, were for most of Colombia's history the two dominant parties in the country, with almost every presidential election before 2006 having either a liberal winner or a liberal as the second most voted for candidate. It nowadays plays a much smaller role in Colombian politics, although the party is still one of the strongest in the country. The Liberals this presidential election officially endorsed Gutierrez, but there is also a faction of dissident liberals who back Petro. It is mostly based in the eastern interior, the Caribbean, and in some areas of the coastal north, and is overall mostly remained the same after the March election, but lost some seats in the Chamber of Representatives. It has 33 representatives, 15 senators, and sends one member to Andean Parliament. It is currently headed by Cesar Gaviria, a former president and former ambassador to the US. The Colombian liberals tend to be socially progressive, support a mixed economy, and generally oppose extreme changes to the status quo. On its website, it talks about how it's proud to have created laws that help victims of the political conflict with greater support from the government. They help make it easier for workers to get a direct discount. They normalize the status for people who have defaulted on multiple loans, and a law that gave employers tax benefits for keeping employees working at their job. While the Liberals are one of the largest parties in Colombia, they seem to be struggling to stay relevant. The party has been steadily losing more and more ground as different people break off from the party to form their own new groups. In fact, 3 of the parties we will talk about later on are all breakoffs of the Liberal Party, forming their own political outfits. This has greatly reduced the influence of the Colombian liberals, and essentially killed the right wing of the party. The new remaining rump wing, however, isn't left-wing enough for many Colombians, as evidenced by the rise of the historic Pact. The Liberals are still a large player in Colombian politics, but their divided nature makes it hard to really categorize the party or effectively sway them into an effective voting bloc. The Colombian Liberals are also seen as being too corrupt and unwilling to rock the boat to make much needed changes in Colombia, and of just being a party that is outdated in modern Colombian politics. The next party is also one of the oldest parties in the country, the Partido Conservador Colombiano, or Colombian Conservative Party. The party is, unsurprisingly, conservative, and represents the more traditional conservative establishment in the country. It, pre-2016, had its presidential candidate either win or come in second place every election, so it's played a pretty big role in influencing the country, but in recent years, like the Liberals, have shrunk as new parties have become more prominent. The Conservatives formerly were dominant in much of the center of the country, but in March they did best broadly in the north and overall made some moderate gains. They are a part of the Team for Colombia coalition, which is working with Gutierrez to help him get elected. The party currently has 27 representatives, 16 senators, and sends one member to Andean Parliament. It is currently headed by Omar Yepes, a former representative and senator. The party has historically been seen as fighting for free market economics, holds positive views of privatization, is socially conservative, and is a strong supporter of the Catholic Church. The Conservatives also tend to oppose light terms on leftist guerrillas and favor a more aggressive approach towards them, and are, like the Liberals, broadly in favor of the status quo and not making serious changes to the country. Gutierrez, while admittedly not a member of the party, is seemingly basing his campaign on his record and his hope to increase investment in the country, is opposed to corruption, and wants to crack down on criminal elements, and, I'm guessing, wants to protect the traditional family, based on how he defines himself on his website. I have done a lot of comparing between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and that's because they both are really in the same sort of political situation. Both parties are seen as being corrupt and unwilling to rock the boat to make much needed changes in Colombia, and of just being a party that is outdated in modern Colombian politics. The exact same thing I said for the Liberals. The Conservatives also seem to have a fair amount of infighting and factionalism within the party, although they seem to be broadly more united than the Liberals. Also important to note, in a big political scandal back in the mid-2000s, known as the Parapolitics scandal, it was found that many politicians, from not just the Conservative Party, but also including the Conservative Party, had been working with paramilitary groups in the country, with many members of the Conservative Party forced to either resign or were arrested for corruption after the scandal took place, which has severely hurt their reputation. So next is kind of two political groups. There is the political party the Green Alliance, and the Coalition Hope Center Alliance. These two political blocs worked together in the senatorial race in March, but it seems post-election these two will drift apart. The Greens are another party with a self-explanatory ideology. They back green politics and are environmentalist. The Hope Center Alliance, on the other hand, is more of a centrist/center-left bloc, containing breakoffs of the Liberal Party, environmentalist, and indigenous activist. The two groups, when combining their vote share, did well in Bogotá, the diaspora, and in the center of the country, and overall increased in size. The Hope Center Alliance is backing Sergio Fajardo, a former mayor of Medellin, and former governor of Antioquia. The Green Alliance is technically not endorsing any candidate, with several news reports noting that several of its members are backing Petro, but the Green Alliance also backed Fajardo last time, and I suspect the Green Alliance, which is a more moderate organization than the historic Pact, might lean towards the more moderate Fajardo. The two blocs together have 19 representatives, 14 senators, and send one member to Andean Parliament. The two blocs are both center-leftish moderates. The Green Alliance is very focused on environmental issues, but also is broadly socially progressive and supports further peace deals with the guerrillas. The Hope Center Alliance merged as a coalition to fight for a more transparent government, and like the Green Alliance, supports more environmental regulations. Fajardo is running his campaign on fighting corruption, wants to prop up environmentally friendly industries, supports progressive taxes, wants to invest more in the black community, wants to negotiate with the ELN guerrillas while cracking down on organized crime, wants more territorial autonomy, and wants to increase pension funds. The big problem the two blocs suffer with is really just the fact that they are too left-wing for the Colombian conservatives and liberals, but too moderate and neoliberal for the historic Pact. Ultimately, they just end up in an awkward position, failing to really gain traction. The fact that they failed to unite together for the election to the Chamber of Representatives, and especially for the presidential election, which has really doomed the two blocs to be smaller than they could have been had they worked together. In opinion polls, Fajedo is polling around 7.8% in a distant fourth. There also have been several Green Alliance politicians, and even Fajedo himself, who have been accused of corruption. Next we go to Cambio Radical, or Radical Change. Radical Change is a right-wing liberal party that was formed in the late 90s as a breakoff of the Liberal Party. The Radical Change the party promoted really focused on removing corruption and ending violence in the country. It is currently backing Gutierrez in his run for the presidency. It, in the March election, got the most support in the Caribbean and the Eastern Interior, and overall lost support. It currently has 18 representatives, 11 senators, and sends one member to Andean Parliament. Radical Change is, as stated before, opposed to corruption, and believes that the government must crack down on violent organizations in order to end violence in the country. I also suspect that since they are a right-wing liberal breakoff, they are probably broadly in favor of free market economics and privatization, and are in favor of the status quo. The fact that a party called Radical Change is likely very much in favor of the status quo probably doesn't help their image. I know at least going into the YouTube comment sections on their YouTube channel, you can see people making fun of this fact. Because they are seen as a part of the status quo, they are often accused of a lot of the same stuff other establishment parties are accused of. Corruption tied to paramilitaries, and not actually caring about the people of Colombia. The next party is actually the current ruling party of the country, but in the elections in March, it suffered for reasons I will talk about later on. Centro Democrático, or Democratic Center, is a conservative and right-wing populist party, largely based around its current leader and former president, Álvaro Uribe. Uribe, a former member of the Liberal Party, broke off from the Liberal Party before his presidency, and then after his presidency set up the Democratic Center as a party to get his allies elected to office. After the 2018 elections, the party was the most voted for party, and the current outgoing president, Iván Duque, being elected from the party. I'll talk more about this in a bit, but just know that Uribe is a fairly controversial and polarizing figure, with him alternatively being praised for bringing peace to the country, and also blamed for leading to a large number of civilian deaths and committing war crimes. The party is largely based around the city of Medellin, broadly in the northeast, and in the diaspora. The Democratic Center is currently backing Gutierrez for president. The Democratic Center has 16 representatives, 14 senators, and sends one member to Andean Parliament. The Democratic Center broadly wants to carry on the legacy of Uribe. It opposes further concessions to leftist guerrillas, supporting a more powerful Colombian army to counter the insurgents. It is friendly towards economic liberalism, foreign multinational corporations, and privatization. It also wants to do more to reduce inflation, fight against corruption, is socially conservative, wants to protect private property, and is very friendly with NATO and America. The party is considered, depending on who you ask, either made up of allies of Uribe, or is really just a puppet party for Uribe, who is the one really dominating how the party votes and operates. Uribe is, as stated previously, a pretty controversial politician. He did, from 2002 to 2010, lead the Colombian armed forces to crush rebel groups like FARC, and the economy grew under him, but he also was accused of several major controversies. These include corruption, fraud, and ties to paramilitaries, which are all bad, but sadly not necessarily uncommon for Colombian politics. However, one of the most controversial aspects of his presidency was the fact that soldiers were given benefits for reporting battlefield casualties on the enemy side. This led to soldiers killing innocent civilians and then reporting them as enemy combatants. And while, admittedly, this type of thing happened before Uribe, it is notable that Uribe has tended to try to cover up war crimes committed by the Colombian government. There also have been controversies about Duque getting elected via vote buying, and in 2019, 2020, and 2021, several protests were carried out against his government over privatization, increases in taxes, and police brutality. Next we go to Partido de la Unión por la Gente, or Union Party of the People, or Party of the U. Party of the U is a liberal party and was another breakoff of the Liberal Party. It was originally formed as a party of supporters of Uribe before it became the party of Juan Manuel Santos, the president from 2010 to 2018. While Santos was originally close to Uribe, they drifted apart after the 2016 peace accords, although they are nowadays fairly close with the Duque government. It is currently a part of the Team for Colombia coalition and is backing Gutierrez. It got most support from the northern coast and the eastern interior, and overall lost support last election. It currently has 16 representatives and 10 senators. It is currently headed by Dilian Frentesca Toro, a former governor of the Villa de Cauca department and senator. Party of the U sorta acts like a centrist party in Colombian politics, being left of the conservatives and right of the liberals. It backs a strong welfare state, and Santos, while president, sought to build up the country's infrastructure and build more housing for the poor. Santos, while he initially worked to crush leftist guerrillas like his predecessor, in 2016 he signed a peace deal with FARC, giving amnesty to many of its members and giving them some presence in the Colombian Congress. The party is also sympathetic towards giving more autonomy to local regions and supports same-sex marriage. Party of the U is like a lot of parties, accused of corruption and ties to paramilitaries. Santos's decision to negotiate with FARC was, and is still today, a controversial decision, with many accusing him of letting terrorists get away with murder. A referendum held in 2016 actually had the majority of Colombians vote against the peace deal, although participation for the referendum was low, and Santos carried out with the peace deal. There also seems to be some internal divisions in the party, because although the party officially backs Gutierrez, there's also apparently a decent number of people in the party who back Petro. I will also say the party, like many of the parties we have talked about, like the liberal and conservative parties, Radical Change, and Democratic Center, while they all have some differences, are all broadly parties that represent the traditional political elites, don't want to rock the boat too much, and all back either free market economics or a mixed economy. Next we go to a recently established party with Liga de Gobernantes Anticorrupción, or League of Anti-Corruption Governors. The League is, as the name would suggest, opposed to corruption, and is a broadly populist party. It was formed by Rodolfo Hernandez, a former mayor of Bucaramanga, and the party's presidential candidate, who, notably, despite the name, is also accused of corruption. Hernandez largely seems to have based his campaign on both fighting corruption and improving infrastructure in the country. Hernandez is currently in a distant third place in opinion polls, polling around roughly 11.8%. The party only contested elections in the Santander department for the Chamber of Representatives, which is where Bucaramanga is located, and will likely be Hernandez's base of support for the presidential election. The party currently has 2 representatives. The last party we will talk about is the Movimiento Independiente de Renovación Absolute, or Independent Movement of Absolute Renovation, or MIRA. MIRA ideologically officially believes in MIRAism, which seems to be a sort of combination of Christian democratic thought and communalism. It is closely affiliated with the Church of God Ministry of Jesus Christ International, a Pentecostal church mostly based in Colombia, but also found in other parts of the Americas. The party strongly supports religious freedom, supports more environmental regulations, is opposed to same-sex marriage and abortion. The party has, in a shock I know, been accused of corruption. The party is currently a part of the Team for Colombia coalition and backs Gutierrez. The party in the March elections got most support west of Bogotá and in the diaspora. It currently has 1 representative and 3 senators. It is currently headed by Carlos Eduardo Guevara, a senator and former representative. So those are the main political parties of Colombia. I think there's a couple other smaller ones, but I really think that these couple are probably the most significant in politics today. In summary, there is the left-wing historic Pact, which is backing Petro for the election, the Hope Center Alliance, which is backing Fajedo, the Green Alliance, which is divided on who to support, the League, which backs Hernandez, and finally a collection of other conservative and liberal parties, which all back Gutierrez. Overall, corruption and ties to violent groups is very much a problem in the country, and a lot of parties have a roughly similar right-leaning platform. But I still think it's interesting to learn about the politics there, and see even in the parties that all have this kind of center-right platform, to see where they line up and where they are divided. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope if you are from Colombia, you vote on the 29th for a president that works for you. So up next, I will talk about the history of Burundi. I'm not sure how long that'll take. Maybe like 2-ish weeks. I haven't really done the research. And then after that, I will go over political parties in New Zealand, which I'm kind of excited. Someone should be helping me with that one. And then for a bit of a special treat, I'll talk about the primaries in my home state of Washington. There are primaries on things like late July and then early August. So I'll try to get it out before then, which realistically I most likely can do. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed. Take care. If you want, you can email me at whydocountries@gmail.com. for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.